September 21st, 1989.
Hurricane Hugo, packing winds of 135 miles per hour as it hit the coast of South Carolina last night. The eye of the hurricane passed just to the east of Charleston, but not by very much.
Isle of Palm, South Carolina. At half past midnight, a Category 4 hurricane is making landfall on the Carolina coast. And 30 miles to the north, 500 people are standing on gymnasium bleachers watching the water rise. Hugo is moving on shore right now. Winds at the coast are at 135 miles per hour. Storm surge readings are extreme. If you are still near the water, you should not be. The designation was Category 4. Sustained winds above 130 miles per hour. Storm surge up to 18 feet. Catastrophic damage along a wide coastal corridor. Hugo met every condition.
A terrifying spectacle in the Caribbean. A huge hurricane cutting a wide trail of death and destruction, now heading northwestward on an uncertain course.
What no category number captures is this. Hugo had been re-intensifying in the final hours before landfall, strengthening when models said it should weaken. Its track was aimed directly at the most dangerous stretch of South Carolina coastline, the shallow, low-lying corridor north of Charleston, where rivers spill into open bays, where the land barely clears sea level, and where tens of thousands of people, many of them black and many of them poor, had no real means to leave. The official death toll in South Carolina was 35. Some researchers believe that number was never accurate. Hundreds of millions in federal aid flowed to the state in the months that followed, and studies found that the communities hardest hit by Hugo, rural, predominantly African American, without political influence, waited longest and received least. A United States senator called the Federal Response Agency a bunch of bureaucratic jackasses. The communities he was talking about barely made the news cycle. This is not Charleston's Hugo. This is the Hugo that struck the coast nobody was watching. Find Charleston on a map. Move north along the South Carolina coastline. The land flattens almost immediately. Barrier islands separated from the mainland by miles of salt marsh. Rivers draining into wide, shallow bays. Tidal ground sitting 2 to 3 feet above mean high water. This is the coast of McClellanville, of Awendaw, of Bulls Bay. Bulls Bay opens directly to the southeast, directly into Hugo's path. Wide, shallow, fully exposed, its maximum depth at low tide is roughly 12 feet. When a hurricane pushes surge across a shelf that shallow, the water does not dissipate. It stacks, it funnels. When Hugo drove a 20-foot wall of water across Bulls Bay, the bay delivered it directly to McClellanville. McClellanville was a shrimping village of roughly 500 people, set at the western edge of the Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge. Its houses were old and wooden. Its highest point sat approximately 12 feet above sea level. The county had designated Lincoln High School as the community's primary storm shelter. South Carolina's coast had not taken a direct hit from a major hurricane since Gracie struck near Beaufort in 1959.
There is now, quote, a possibility, perhaps a probability, that some part of the hurricane may affect the southeast United States mainland in about 72 hours.
30 years of quiet had eroded the urgency that emergency planning demands. Evacuation routes for rural communities north of Charleston, 2-lane roads through swamp and forest, were not built to move thousands quickly. Governor Carroll Campbell Jr., 48, ordered the evacuation of approximately 300,000 people from the barrier islands in the Charleston Peninsula. That order saved lives, but the people it did not reach were, overwhelmingly, the people with the fewest options. Hugo formed from a tropical wave off West Africa. Guadeloupe with winds above 130 miles per hour, then Montserrat the same day. It grazed northeastern Puerto Rico on September 18th and turned northwest over open Atlantic water. On the morning of September 21st, Hugo was crossing the Bahamas at Category 3, winds near 110 miles per hour, forward speed around 20 miles per hour. Forecast models suggested slight weakening before landfall. Gulf Stream temperatures said otherwise. Through the afternoon and evening, Hugo re-intensified. Winds climbed to 135 miles per hour. Central pressure fell to 934 millibars, a strong Category 4, accelerating northwest. At 11:05 p.m. on September 21st,
once people did decide to evacuate, it wasn't that difficult to get them out. But hurricane experts worry today with new developments springing up along the coast.
Hugo's outer rain bands reached South Carolina. At 12:30 a.m. on September 22nd, The center made landfall near Isle of Palms. By 2 a.m., the eye was crossing Berkeley County. By 4 a.m., it had reached Sumter County, still carrying winds above 80 miles per hour, more than 100 miles from the coast. Hugo's center passed just east of Columbia by mid-morning. Gusts there hit 83 miles per hour. By early afternoon, the storm had tracked into the Charlotte area, carrying destructive winds to a city 300 miles from landfall. The storm surge in Charleston Harbor reached approximately 12 feet, enough to flood the historic waterfront and push water over the battery into the lowest streets of the peninsula. 30 miles north at Bulls Bay, it was 20 feet. That is not a marginal difference. It is a different category of destruction. McClellanville stood directly in its path. The 500 people inside Lincoln High School, elderly residents, families with young children, people unable to evacuate further, were about to experience what 20 feet of surge looks like coming through a gymnasium door. Water entered around 1 a.m. Within 30 minutes, it was 4 feet deep on the floor. People climbed onto bleachers. The water kept rising. By the surge's peak, it was 8 feet deep inside. Men and women held children overhead. Residents climbed into the steel rafters. Some tied themselves to equipment to avoid being swept away. Everyone inside survived. The surge peaked and retreated. At dawn, the people of McClellanville walked out into a town unrecognizable. Houses off their foundations, shrimping boats in the middle of streets. To the west, the Francis Marion National Forest had been shredded. Biologists estimated 70% of its trees had been damaged or destroyed. The storm lasted hours. The forest took decades. When the sun came up on September 22nd, the cameras were in Charleston. That is not a criticism. The images from its barrier islands were devastating and real. Isle of Palms was gutted. Sullivan's Island had taken the eye wall directly. The Wild Dunes Resort was unrecognizable. The story was genuine. It was not the whole story. In McClellanville, 30 miles north, there were no cameras, no phone service. The roads in narrow 2-lane stretches through downed timber and flooding were blocked. The National Guard did not reach McClellanville in force until September 23rd. Food and water did not arrive in meaningful quantities until September 24th. For 48 hours after surviving 8 feet of floodwater, the people of that town had no power, no clean water, and no word of when help was coming. Senator Fritz Hollings, 67, visited the storm-damaged areas and was not quiet about what he found. He called FEMA a bunch of bureaucratic jackasses on the Senate floor, arguing federal resources were being concentrated on visible urban recovery while rural communities waited. That quote ran across the country. The communities he was describing remained largely out of frame. Hugo's official U.S. death toll was 49, with 35 recorded in South Carolina. Caribbean deaths raised the total to approximately 86. Researchers who examined the South Carolina count raised consistent concerns the figure was incomplete. Deaths in isolated rural communities were difficult to attribute precisely, and those communities were underrepresented in the reporting systems of 1989. The count was never revisited. Federal assistance eventually totaled approximately $1.1 billion directed to South Carolina. By the official record, the recovery succeeded. Charleston's historic district was restored. Barrier Island tourism returned within 2 years. In the rural Low Country, in Awendaw, in Hugo, in Jamestown, the recovery moved more slowly and reached far less. Studies documented why. Many families in those communities held land through heirs' property, passed across generations without formal legal title. Without clear deed, they were disqualified from FEMA's primary rebuilding programs. They owned land they could not legally prove they owned. This was a known feature of federal disaster law before Hugo arrived. It was unchanged when Hugo left. When Floyd struck North Carolina in 1999 and Katrina hit the Gulf Coast in 2005, the same provision stripped aid from thousands of black families in the worst-hit areas. Hugo was not the warning that changed the system. It was the warning the system quietly set aside. Hugo made landfall in the early hours of September 22, 1989, and cleared South Carolina before sunrise. Hours in, years out. At the time, it was the most expensive hurricane in American history, roughly $7 billion in U.S. damage. Its surge at Bulls Bay remains among the highest ever recorded on the East Coast. It killed at least 86 people across 2 coastlines, and it exposed exactly how this country responds to disaster. Which communities get cameras, which get silence, which properties get rebuilt with federal money, and which get disqualified on a provision the government had known about for years and never fixed. McClellanville rebuilt. Through family and community and church, it came back. The people who climbed into the rafters of Lincoln High School went back to their shrimping boats and their forests and their lives. The record says Hugo caused 49 American deaths and that $1.1 billion reached the state. The record is not the whole story. It never is.